One day, my friend Ricky asked me to go to a zoo no one knows about. He said that it is a secret underground zoo where only a limited number of people could enter through personal connections. The entrance fee was exorbitantly expensive, almost $1,000, but since Ricky came from a rich family, he offered to pay for my admission. I was very excited and went to the zoo with him. When I went to the entrance, many people were there, and the staff started guiding us. Welcome to the human zoo. Our zoo has combined human and animal genes to create the most beautiful creatures. Aren't you really excited? But you must write a confidential oath that you'll never reveal anything you saw here today. And whoever reveals the secret will become prey to the beasts here. There were murmurs from the crowd, but everyone signed the oath and got on the elevator. The elevator went all the way down to the 10th basement floor, and when the door opened, a large glass wall stretched out ahead, and there were living creatures inside. The first thing I saw was a human figure, 7 feet tall, covered entirely in crocodile skin. Its torso was very long, and it stood on short limbs. The creature squealed as it stared at us with its yellow reptile eyes. Its opened mouth was full of crocodile teeth. Walking further inside, a huge eagle-like creature was crouching inside the glass, and when it spread its black wings that was covering its whole body, a human-like face emerged. Standing on human feet, its wingspan seemed to be nearly 8 feet, and it flew into the air in a flash. The ceiling of the zoo, which was below 10 floors underground, was very high, and the eagle flew here and there. Then the zookeeper threw food on the floor. It flew over and snatched it at once. Everyone cheered and clapped. It was an unbelievable sight. As I continued walking, I saw more and more shocking creatures. A creature with the head of a black panther and a lower body of a human. A creature with a snake head and a human body. A creature with a tiger face mixed with a human face, and so on. They pounced on the glass whenever we passed by. I was continuously shocked. In the meantime, someone took out a hidden camera and tried to take pictures of the creatures. Then, a security guard took the person's camera from behind, threw it away, and cursed at him. And after a while, a staff started guiding us. All right, finally, the main event of the day is coming soon. Don't miss the best spectacle on Earth. After a while, the zookeepers appeared, dragging someone in the cage full of tiger men. That person was struggling for help, and the zookeepers just threw him into the cage. In an instant, the tiger men ran up to him and tore him into pieces with both hands. I screamed on the spot, and so did the other people. Then the staff said, "Do not worry, that's not a real human, but a human clone created by genetic recombination." I couldn't breathe. To me, this wasn't a spectacle. It was just a crime committed by madmen. Then I saw a doctor surrounded by people in the distance. The doctor was making an impassioned speech about how he had succeeded in combining the genes. I got furious, but everyone was just watching with interest. Some of them asked, "How much is that animal? I want to own it as a pet." Then the doctor presented an astronomical amount. There were about 50 species of creatures in the zoo, and there was also an aquarium. There were creatures like turtle men and stingray men in the aquarium. All of them were too bizarre for me. I came home and thought about it carefully. I eventually called the police. After a while, I heard a voice in front of my house. "It's the police! Open the door!" When I opened the front door, they were not the police, but employees of the zoo. They covered something on my head and put me in the car. When I regained consciousness, I was in a laboratory at the zoo, and the doctor was standing in front of me, scowling at me, and said, "How dare you break your promise? I'll change your genetic structure and make you a beast. If I inject you DNA modification, your body will gradually grow hair, and you will grow fangs, and your nose will get longer. You'll gradually turn into a dog. Another great piece will be created." I begged him for help, but he gave me anesthetic, and I passed out. I was stuck in that lab for days. The doctor was still studying my DNA as well as that of dogs. But a few days later, government agents suddenly rushed in and arrested all the zoo staff and doctors. I was able to come home and explain to my family what had happened, but they didn't believe it. The zoo was closed, but surprisingly, the incident did not appear anywhere in the media or the news and was thoroughly hidden. And a few days later, men in black suits came to me and warned me not to disclose a thing about the zoo. Eventually, the zoo vanished in thin air, and no one knows where the creatures have gone or what happened to them.
I live in an apartment, and one day I started to hear a man swearing every morning at 4 a.m. from upstairs. I endured it once or twice, but it was so annoying to hear it at the same time every day. I eventually went upstairs, and on the front door of the house there was a sign that read "Exorcist." I knocked on the door. After a while, a man came out, but the instant he saw me, he frowned and said, "What is a sane man not possessed by a ghost doing here?" However, his pupils were very small, his eyes were mostly white, and cold air flowed from his house like a refrigerator. I was startled, but I tried to stay calm and said, "I live downstairs. Why do you always lose your temper at 4 in the morning? It's so noisy that I can't sleep." He said, 4 in the morning is when evil spirits run riot the most, so I exterminate them at that time. I have no choice. But the spirits I exorcised are infesting this house. Get out quickly before they attach themselves to you. I glanced around his house, but it was dead quiet inside. However, before I opened the door, I had heard a lot of people talking inside. It was really strange. He pushed me and slammed the door. I felt unsettled and got goosebumps, but I just came back home. From that day on, I started to hear someone singing softly all day long. It was a faint sound at first, but the sound grew louder and closer to my ears, and I felt like I was going crazy. As a result, I went back to the exorcist and he looked at me, clicked his tongue, and said, "As expected, you're possessed by a ghost. The ghost is singing a song of death in your ears." However, I couldn't believe him, so I just came back home. But after that, more creepy things started to happen. While I was sleeping, someone suddenly covered my nose with its hand, and I woke up from choking. But there was no one around, and my nose was stuffy for a while and could not be cleared up. And one day I was driving, and suddenly a hand pressed my foot, and I couldn't take my foot off the accelerator. The car sped up like crazy, and I managed to get my foot off with all my strength and survive. And one time, when I woke up at dawn and went out to drink water, something flashed on the floor, and when I turned on the light, there was a kitchen knife under my feet. Since I live alone, nobody would have left a knife here. I thought something serious would happen if this keeps up, so I visited the exorcist again and knocked on the door. The exorcist looked at me and said, "You're not dead yet." To survive, I finally asked him for an exorcism. I went to his house at 4 a.m. and the exorcist began to recite prayers. Then a voice whispered very quickly in my ear, "Come with me to the afterlife. Let's live happily together forever in the world of the dead. Come with me." But what gave me more goosebumps was that when I heard that voice, I suddenly felt so good and found myself reply, "Okay, let's go together." Then the exorcist swore at me with a very loud voice, and the voice in my ears slowly started to fade away. The exorcism continued all night, and the morning dawned before I knew it. The exorcist said that he had removed all the evil spirits and told me to go back and never come back again. I came back home, and I still heard him swearing every morning upstairs, but I didn't dare to go there. Fortunately, nothing happened after that. However, sometimes I hear someone knocking on my front door, except that no one is standing outside.
I had a friend named Craig, whom I was close to since childhood. After not seeing each other for a while, we coincidentally ran into each other on the street when we became adults. I greeted him warmly, but he seemed different. I noticed that he had shaved his curly hair and strangely kept hiding his right hand behind his back. I tried to shake hands with him, but he never revealed his right hand and instead extended his left hand. I asked him what was wrong with his hand, and he said, "I don't use my right hand normally." I didn't think much of it and let it pass. From that day on, we often met and spent time together, but he always kept his right hand in his pocket. I couldn't understand it, but I guessed that he had his reasons. Then, suddenly, I lost contact with Craig. I went to his house, but he had moved. It seemed like he had changed his phone number too. It was strange, but I thought he had just gone away. However, sometime later, the police came to visit me. They showed me a photo from a CCTV camera where I was seen talking to Craig. The police suspected Craig of kidnapping and killing a woman, and they were currently searching for him. Since only Craig's back was visible in the CCTV footage, they asked me for a photo of his face. I was shocked, but then I realized something. Craig always had a habit of looking around wherever he went and scanning the ceiling. Sometimes he would suddenly turn around, showing me his back and not even looking at my face while talking. At that time, I couldn't understand all those actions, but now I realized that he was trying to avoid CCTV cameras. I also remembered that I had never taken a photo of Craig, and whenever I tried to take his picture, he would get angry and cover his face. In the end, I did my best to describe his facial features to the police. The police left, and I was in shock. My friend was a criminal. But a few weeks later, I received another call from the police. They informed me that Craig had been arrested. And then I heard the shocking truth. It turned out that Craig had cut off all the fingertips of his right hand to remove his fingerprints. He used only that hand to break into women's homes, commit crimes, and escape. That's why he always kept his hand hidden. It was then that I remembered, when I visited his house, I saw him training with a human-shaped punching bag, using only one hand to strike and subdue it. I had just thought he enjoyed exercising. It was sort of a rehearsal for a crime.
This happened only 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it often, and I know without a doubt, me and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I work for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorders, the mentally ill, and to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. My role with the developmentally delayed is similar to a lower-ranked social worker. One thing I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their own personal goals set for that year, similar to an IEP in public schools. One of my patients has a goal to walk and/or hike at least 1 mile 3 times a week. When I made my visit to her home, walking and hiking was what I needed to see her achieve. So she took us both on a walking and slight hiking trail nearby. Her and I are actually similar ages, ours being 40. As we were walking the trail, we get to a point that was much more isolated. We were no longer walking the trail that loops around a neighborhood pond with many people, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods and a cotton field. Her and I were walking and talking when she suddenly stopped walking. I looked at her, and just as she went to say, "I have a bad feeling," I had an overwhelming feeling myself that someone was watching us. Due to her development delays, I felt more concerned for her welfare than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel fear. I felt a feeling of protection for her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of leaves crunching, and sure enough, a guy who looked to be in his 30s is suddenly coming out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping up towards us. There was no one else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creeping up, I knew whatever he wanted was nefarious. I told her to continue walking and gave her a head start. I don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around, stopped, and I looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. But as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I kept staring at him, and then I started to walk back towards my patient so he understood my eyes were on him. Then as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he disappeared as fast as he came, back into the woods. If he had simply wanted to walk the nature trail, why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stared at him? Why didn't he just continue walking and pass us? It was evident to me that this guy was waiting and watching for a woman or women to come down the isolated trail. The fact that he emerged from the woods when he did made it clear that he had been hiding and stalking. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my own feeling of being watched saved one or both of us from whatever that man had planned.
This is a creepy story of what I experienced while camping with a friend of mine 5 years ago. We went to a deep valley almost unknown, and we drove for more than 10 hours and walked for another 5 hours to get there. Then a majestic scenery of nature unfolded in front of us, and clear water, mountains, and fresh air surrounded us. This must be the paradise of gods. Brad and I started fishing, but after a while, I heard a strange sound. At first, I thought it was a bug or a bird. The more I listened, the more it sounded like a person's voice. I told Brad,
"Do you think someone else came here?"
Brad replied,
"Bro, how many times have I told you? This is a place I only know."
I looked around and, to my surprise, found a man in the grass staring at us, wearing something very shabby, like leather. He was looking at us with a blank stare. It seemed that he was holding something like raw meat of some animal in his hand. I was startled and shouted asking who he is, but he didn't say anything, and continued making strange insect-like noises. We got goosebumps, turned on our cell phones, and got ready to call the police. Then he disappeared into the forest. Anxious, we wondered whether we should stop camping. But we couldn't go home since we barely got here. As time passed, we forgot about it, grilled meat, had fun, and fell asleep. But that night, when I woke up to the sound of high-pitched screaming, I realized that Brad was howling. I hurried to his tent. The man I saw during the day and several other people were grabbing Brad's arms and legs, pulling him frantically. It was as if they were trying to tear Brad's limbs apart, and they pulled with all their might in unison. I heard the sound of bones and cartilage being torn. My whole body was shaking, and I picked up my cell phone and dialed 911. But my voice did not come out. I gasped and barely spoke, and the police were dispatched, but it seems like they would take a long time for them to arrive. I knew it was my turn after Brad, so I escaped into the woods like crazy. Then Brad's screaming came to a halt, and I could tell he was dead. I cried as I ran frantically. I was barefoot, so my feet were torn and blood was pouring out. After a while, sirens were heard and the police arrived. But terribly, Brad's upper body was only left in his tent. His arms and legs were all torn off. Everyone was shocked by the terrible scene and started investigating. A few days later, I heard from the police that the culprits had been caught. They were a family that lived in the mountains, and it turned out that they had been grazing grass and eating animals in the mountains, completely distant from civilization. They lived in valleys and cliffs, so their grip became unusually strong. It turned out that the four of them had ripped off Brad's limbs with their bare hands. Their linguistic ability was almost degraded, so they couldn't communicate well. But when the cops asked them where Brad's limbs are, using body language, they pointed to their own stomachs and made gestures as if they had eaten them. And they pointed at the officers' limbs and gestured like they want to eat them. They ended up in prison, but reportedly they were completely isolated because they could harm other prisoners there.
One day, I started to have very vivid dreams and became able to do anything I want in them. At first, in my dreams, I flew around in the air or explored various places. But at some point, I embarked on more and more provocative things. I enjoyed beating passers-by and robbing shops, the things I couldn't do in real life. Then the police arrived and tried to suppress me, and since I was invincible in my dreams, I was able to defeat them all. Then one day, when I was on my way home from work, a person who looked somewhat familiar was staring at me from afar. I looked closely to see if he was someone I knew, and I was shocked. He was the police officer who tried to arrest me in my dreams. His looks were so peculiar that I could remember him. His eyes were abnormally big. His chin was very long and pointy, and his skin was awfully red. Why is he here? For a moment I thought it was a dream, but it was clearly reality. He approached me with a blank expression, grabbed me by the collar, and lifted me up. I was so startled by his tremendous power, and I screamed at him. "What are you doing?" The people around us stopped me, and I hurriedly left. The man was staring at me expressionless until I was out of his sight. From that night, I no longer played around in my dreams because I was so horrified. I continued to live peacefully for a while, but as time passed, I started to make a fuss again to relieve stress. I broke into any random house in my dream and made a mess. But a few days later, when I was going to work, a man grabbed my shoulder, and when I looked around, I realized he was again the police officer in my dream. I was startled. Then he started choking me. I was perplexed and shouted, "Why are you doing this?" And he replied, looking at me, "Don't disrupt our world's order." I was gasping as I couldn't breathe, and people around us pulled us apart, and I ran away like crazy. Since then, the man appeared in my dreams every night, so I no longer played around in my dreams. I couldn't. As I stopped committing bad things in my dreams, I no longer ran into that man in real life. I thought it was a good thing, but my doubt still remains unsettled. Who was he? Was he really the man I saw in my dreams? Then does he know everything about what I did in my dream?
My name's Amanda, and I live alone with my 2-year-old daughter. I always felt uneasy at our old apartment. One day, the drains were clogged, so I called maintenance to come and fix it in the morning around 10 a.m. They had a key to access any apartment, so I made sure to set an alarm for 9 a.m. just to make sure I was up before anyone showed up. That night was a regular night. I put my daughter to sleep, and I locked all the doors and windows. Since it's just us, I was always paranoid despite living on the 5th floor. Morning eventually comes, and I open my eyes and see my daughter still asleep in her bed, but I couldn't move. Just then, I noticed everything got quiet, and I saw some kind of figure peeking its head around the corner of my open door. I couldn't make out any features on it. I think my brain tried to make it look like someone I knew. It didn't feel right to me, but oddly enough, I wasn't scared either. Then the words, "Someone's at the door," popped in my head. I was so confused. How would I know that? And I couldn't even move. But over and over, I kept hearing, "Someone's at the door," while the figure was just there. After maybe 30 seconds, I could hear my door being unlocked and someone saying, "Hello?" My door had 3 locks, 2 deadbolt locks, and a chain lock that prevented the door from opening even if you had a key. As soon as I realized what was going on, I woke up. I just laid in bed, halfway afraid and trying to figure out what just happened. But surely enough, my daughter was still asleep. I looked at my phone and it was 7 a.m. I looked at the door, but no one was there. I inspected the house, but no one was there. When I went to check the door, I saw one of my deadbolt locks was open. But I know I locked it last night. I just stood there in disbelief. I was so grateful for the chain lock, and then I thought, did that mysterious figure try to warn me? Was it trying to get my attention? Maintenance came later, and I asked them, did someone come by earlier, and they said yes. Apparently someone canceled a call and they moved my appointment up without telling me. When they realized they couldn't get in, they just left and came back at 10. Nothing like that ever happened to me again, and a month later I moved out of that apartment complex. I still don't know what I experienced or why that figure came to warn me, but I'm grateful that it did, and me and my daughter are safe. I'm 18 years old, and this happened to me when I was 10. I was at my grandmother's house, and it was a normal summer night until we saw that thing in the sky. So me and my sister, along with 2 of our cousins who are siblings, were on a terrace. Like I said earlier, I was 10 at the time, and my sister was 4. One of my cousins was 9, let's call her B, while her sister was around my sister's age, let's call her G. There were only 4 of us on the terrace, and we were talking about random things. We had an old mattress there. I was lying on that mattress and looking at the sky. It was a full moon night. Suddenly, I saw something in the sky, and it was hovering right above us. It was a human kind of creature with bat-like wings. Since it was a full moon, I could clearly see him. His body was like a normal human body, and his wings were also like human skin. Moreover, I could clearly see through his wings, and I saw a bunch of veins and arteries. His wings were shiny in the moonlight. As soon as I saw it, I screamed and told everyone to run downstairs. And I was the only one who fully looked at it, while one of my cousins, B, only saw his wings. We ran downstairs. And I forgot to mention his size was around the same as a normal human being, but with both wings that were so huge, maybe 10 feet or even longer. As we went downstairs, we tried telling everyone what we actually saw just now, but no one believed us. My younger cousin, G, forgot her slippers there on the terrace. So we went upstairs to get those back, and it was still there, hovering over our house, or more like hovering around the moon. Now, sometimes when me and my cousin talk about it, we get confused and wonder if we actually saw that thing that day or we were just hallucinating. But all of us saw that thing. Bad thing, or I say good thing, but we may never get to know what it was or never encounter that thing again.
One day, my friend Austin asked me,
Brandon, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
I pondered for a moment and replied,
Well, flowers, nature, or women.
Austin then said expressionlessly,
The most beautiful thing in the world is the sight of someone dying, their desperate plea for help. No one else in this world possesses a more desperate heart than at that moment. Isn't it truly beautiful? And when they face their impending death, they fight for their lives with everything they have. It's the moment they act most passionately in their lives. If they don't face death, they will live their lives without experiencing such passion. It's truly tragic. That's why every human being must be murdered.
I was taken aback from his passionate and chilling gaze. Yes, he was sincere. In an attempt to change the somber atmosphere, I forced a smile and said,
That's an interesting thought. So, does that mean you have to be murdered too?
He glared at me and replied,
No, I have to stay alive until the end. I have to kill them all.
And then he said something else.
Brandon, let's save humanity together. Put an end to their lifeless existence and create a climax in their lives. Just like a flower that blooms and then withers. And the only way to do that is through murder.
Fear gripped me. I wanted to refuse, but when I saw the madness in his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to do it. If I refused, he would surely kill me. A few days later, he showed me a video.
Brandon, take a look. Another masterpiece has been born.
In the video, a person was hanging upside down. Below them was a large drum filled with water, and it was labeled as hydrochloric acid. The person was screaming for help. Austin said,
Look into this person's eyes. Have you ever seen such a desperate gaze? People in today's world have empty eyes, as if everything bores them. But in reality, they all had eyes as vivid as this person's. Isn't it truly beautiful? Isn't it?
He shouted with exhilaration in his voice, as if roaring in triumph. I trembled in fear. He delightedly replayed the video over and over again. Eventually, the person was dissolved in the acid, and Austin cheered and applauded.
It's truly perfect.
In the end, I went home and reported it to the police, and he was arrested, and he sent me a letter from prison.
Brandon, because of you, my plan to save the world has been ruined. Just watch this world will turn into hell. You will feel the weight of your mistake deeply. Or you can come to your senses now and execute my plan instead. Then, this world can be saved. Kill all those with lifeless eyes and bring vitality back to this world.
When I was young, I once explored an abandoned house with my friend Tyler. We were so excited by the fact that we could finally go inside the abandoned house that had existed for a long time that we burst the door open. But as soon as we entered the house, I smelled something strange that I've never encountered before. Where's this smell coming from? Tyler decided to look around the first floor, and I went up to the second floor. The second floor smelled even worse. I looked around and heard a faint voice somewhere. Over here. I was startled and walked carefully towards the room where the sound was coming from. I'm here. It was clearly a sound made inside the room. I asked whether someone is inside, but there was no response. When I got closer and looked through the crack of the door, I noticed a rotten corpse lying inside the room. I screamed. However, when I went inside, there was nothing but the corpse. Then, whose voice was it? Suddenly, the corpse opened its eyes and said, I want to live! I felt as if my heart had stopped. It wasn't a corpse, but I couldn't believe it. His flesh was decomposing, but how can he be alive? Then he suddenly jumped on me and choked me. I freaked out and pushed him away, and he fell headlong to the floor like a doll. I ran away and shouted at the top of my lungs, calling Tyler. He rushed over to me in surprise, and we went outside and called the police. Moments later, the police arrived. They entered the room and shouted, It's a corpse! I denied, saying that it is alive, and when I looked at him again, what was lying there was, without a doubt, a corpse. Police assumed he died a few days ago, but I couldn't believe it. What the hell is it? The police recovered the body, and I still don't have a clear answer to this mysterious case. People said that I must have been seeing an illusion, but I saw it with my own eyes, for sure. His eyes that looked straight at me, his mournful voice, and even the smell that pierced my nose when he came close to me are all vividly in my memory. Dust stirred up as he moved, and the texture of his hands when he touched my neck was rough. I remember them all, vividly. This could never be a hallucination, but no one believed me. Eventually, I came back home with disappointment and decided to just forget about what had happened that day. And that night, when I looked in the mirror while taking a shower, I was horrified. There were faint strangulation marks on my neck.
My girlfriend told me about 2 weeks ago that she was waiting in line at the convenience store with her friend in Chinatown, New York City, when a large, dapper-looking man approached them. He complimented her coat and commented on how expensive it must be, and she said thank you, and they chatted for a little longer. The man explained that his suit was just a shabby Brooks Brothers suit, but she noticed that he had all sorts of expensive jewelry on. When my girlfriend and her friend mentioned that they were students, he kept making assumptions about how they must be rich and that their parents were paying for everything. My girlfriend started feeling uncomfortable and tried to distance herself from him. He asked them if they had jobs, and they told him no, as they were students. After that, he went on to tell them what he does for a living without being asked. He said, I do all sorts of odd jobs, this and that, but mainly, I have these guys that work for me. I find them off the streets, I feed them, and I give them a place to stay. I'm waiting to meet up with them now. He referred to them as his minions, which suddenly made something that seemed wholesome at first very unsettling. And then he told them that he'd just had his wallet stolen and needed $400 for something. I don't remember the reason. He told them that he would pay them back later that week, but he needed the money right that night. My girlfriend politely declined, and by this point, she was really uncomfortable. She started walking towards the door to leave and said, Nice to meet you, and good luck." They both walked outside and sat on a bench outside the convenience store. As they were sitting and discussing the strange interaction, they saw the man exit and stand about 10 feet away, waiting for a few minutes, looking at his phone. He then met up with his 2 other men, and they chatted for a few minutes. The large man in the suit then walked in the opposite direction, while the other 2 men walked into the store and started holding it up with knives. Absolutely shocked and frozen, my girlfriend and her friend watched as the cashier put her hands up and emptied out the cash register. The 2 men ran out of the store in the same direction the man in the suit had walked. They were both about to call the police, but noticed that the cashier had already done so. They waited at the bench until 2 police cars showed up, and then they walked in to tell the officers what they had just witnessed and tried to help identify the robbers and the man they had just met. I wonder if this is a common occurrence in terms of organized crime, paying homeless people to commit crimes and rob.
I'm 20 years old, and this is a story about what I went through when I was 17. At that time, I had a close friend named Jason. He was from a rich family, and we often hung out at his house. I went to his house that day as usual, and I saw Jason chewing on something. At first, I thought it was candy. I asked what he was eating, and he replied, "This? It's finger cartilage. It's delicious. Do you want to try it?" I thought he was joking, but when I saw blood on his mouth, I realized it was real, and I screamed in shock, pointing at his mouth. "What the hell is that?" he said. "It's human meat. These days there are sellers who specialize in this kind of stuff. What a wonderful world, isn't it? I happened to find them, but now I'm addicted." I cursed at him. Then he looked at me as if I'm strange, and after a while, he showed me an online website, which had lists and prices for each body part. There were cuts of meat and even eyeballs, tongues, and livers. He said, "You can deliver regularly here. How do you like it? It's very good for your health as well." He kept urging me to try it, but I was speechless in shock. Then all of a sudden, he called someone on the phone and said, "Yes, you can come now, I'm ready." I asked him what the phone call was about, and he just laughed, saying it's no big deal. A moment later, I heard a knock, and when he opened the door, 3 men wearing masks were standing there, asking where the thing is. Then Jason pointed at me. I felt like my heart had dropped in an instant, and only then did I realize what was going on. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife in each hand, and shouted, "Don't come close! If you do, I'll slice you and eat you guys up!" The 3 big men looked puzzled and said to Jason, "Hey, why are you letting him move around like that? You should have drugged him or tied him up. How are we supposed to take him?" Then Jason angrily said, "They didn't say anything like that on the website. It said that the staff would just come and work on it. Hurry up, I want to eat!" He pointed at me and shouted. The men seemed to be thinking about it, but eventually went back outside, saying they couldn't continue the transaction. After a while, I hurled abuse at Jason and ran home. I immediately reported him to the police, and the police went to his house and found human flesh in his refrigerator and arrested him. Soon after, the manager of the store where he purchased human flesh was also arrested, and their huge human factory was also uncovered. There, numerous corpses were delivered from all over the country, stored in large freezers, and staff members were working in strict order. Since then, every night I think of that day and tremble in fear. I was very lucky that Jason was clumsy, but if he had been adept, I would have already turned into meat and be in his stomach.
If you see this woman in the forest, don't follow her. My name is Ryan. In the village where I live, there's a deep forest. It's known for incidents like people getting lost or going missing, so most people avoid going too deep into it. However, I loved taking walks in the forest and occasionally ventured deeper. Nothing major had ever happened until that day. Just like any other day, I was taking a walk alone in the forest. Amidst the greenery, I suddenly caught a sight of something pink. Startled, I looked closer and realized it was a woman wearing a pink dress. She stood still, gazing at me. At first, I thought I might be seeing things. How could there be a woman in a dress this deep in the forest? I approached cautiously and asked if she needed help. Observing her face closely, I noticed that she was incredibly beautiful. Without saying a word, she gestured for me to come closer. It felt strange, but I cautiously moved closer, scanning my surroundings. As I got closer, her gestures became more frantic, as if she was fast-forwarding. Her hand movements grew faster and faster. When I finally got close enough to see her face clearly, she suddenly let out an ear-piercing scream, expanding in size dramatically. "Catch him!" At the same time, 4 men burst out of the bushes and sprinted towards me. They were carrying ropes in large sacks. I screamed and ran away. I sprinted at full speed, barely managing to escape them. After running for a while and realizing they weren't chasing me anymore, I reported the incident to the police. My heart was racing from the shock. The police and I searched the forest together, but they were long gone. When we reached the spot where the woman had been standing, we discovered a cabin nearby. Inside, 6 men were locked up. They were nothing but skin and bones, having lived as slaves there for 7 years. According to their accounts, the cabin belonged to a doctor couple who would abduct men passing through the forest and imprison them there as slaves. The abducted men were forced to do all kinds of tasks and were instructed to pretend to be dead when told. If they didn't comply, they would be tied up and beaten all day long. The men expressed their anguish at how miserable their lives had been. The reason they couldn't rebel against the couple was that after abducting them, the couple would tie them up for several days and inject something that would gradually deplete their muscle strength. Eventually, all their muscles would waste away, leaving them powerless to resist. According to the men, the couple's goal was to have 100 slaves. After that horrific incident, I never set foot in the forest again. I don't know if the couple was ever caught or not. It's been 10 years already. I hope they were apprehended, but who knows? There might be another forest where they're abducting and enslaving more people. Welcome to Aqua World Theme Park, the world's largest aquarium.
Aqua World Theme Park, the world's largest aquarium that people all over the world want to visit at least once in their lifetime. This is where I work every day. My job is to take care of the killer whales of the Killer Whale Show, which is the most popular among the many aquariums that unfold past a huge underwater tunnel where sharks, stingrays, and tropical fish swim. The Killer Whale Aquarium is where it is the most crowded, so it is a team with a lot to look after. But as a person who loves killer whales, I felt proud working for the killer whale team, even though it was physically tough. Then one day, after feeding the killer whales dinner late at night and finishing cleaning the aquarium, I finally could get off work, but many employees were gathered in front of a huge logistics truck, rumbling. "What's going on? Why is everyone crowded?" I asked my colleague Jacob.
"Daniel, something unbelievable has happened. Sailors found a mermaid off the coast of Argentina and caught it alive, and Aqua World imported it in private. It seems that mermaids really exist. Now we're going to be the first to see it before telling the press. I can't believe I'm going to see a mermaid in my life."
Eventually, a huge water tank covered with a black cloth was pulled out of the logistics truck, and people were buzzing with excitement. "Put away that damn cloth. Let me have a look." "Why don't you show it? You're going to put it in the aquarium anyway." The officials who got off the truck did not listen at all, but only moved the water tank without saying anything. At that moment, the men who were shouting in the front row rushed at it and removed the black cloth covering the tank, revealing the inside of the tank. And there was a mermaid, crouching in the corner of the tank filled with green, muddy seawater. The water was so muddy that it was hard to see, but the upper body, which was thin like a mummy, revealed the shape of its spine, was clearly a woman's, and I couldn't see her face, as her head was bowed down, but her long hair swaying underwater made her look very much like a human. "Wow, it looks like the mermaid we know." People flocked to the tank and started hitting the glass with their hands. The mermaid that was crouching floated above, as if surprised. The mermaid's tail itself seemed to be 2 meters long, and the long black fins were hideous and grotesque rather than beautiful. "Ah, People screamed, and the officials quickly covered the tank with a black cloth and dragged it into the aquarium. I was so shocked by the disgusting mermaid that I couldn't sleep even after I returned home that night. When I went to work after staying up all night, there was a huge cylindrical tank in the center of the aquarium where the mermaid was to be exhibited, but the tank was empty. I went to Jacob, who was cleaning the tank, and asked, "Jacob, where's the mermaid?" Jacob replied that the mermaid in poor health was hidden in a controlled area to prevent it from dying, and that a special management team was created to concentrate on health management. All the staff working at the aquarium wanted to enter the controlled area, but even access was impossible due to tight security. Likewise, I couldn't see the mermaid for a while and looked at the empty tank, waiting for the day the mermaid would be displayed in the aquarium. In the meantime, the fact that Aquaworld has a mermaid was reported in the media around the world, and myriads of people began to flock in, and even if it was before the mermaid was exhibited, tents waiting to enter the aquarium formed an endless line. This was harsh for the aquarium staff. This was because they gave up on their vacation and worked tirelessly due to the influx of tourists. According to rumors, Dominic, the CEO of Aquaworld, bought the mermaid by paying an astronomical amount of money. But even the mermaid has yet been exhibited. It seems that it is enough for him to get more bang for his buck. What was even more shocking was that Aquaworld even started a free admission event in the midst of such a hectic situation with so many people gathered around. A free opening event was launched from 9 p.m. to midnight for foreign workers who live alone without families, homeless people, and low-income people. Upon hearing this news, the aquarium staff staged a protest against overtime work, but fortunately, they were finally relieved when they heard that a night staff will be separately hired and managed during the free night opening hours. A few days later, while I was changing into my work clothes when I arrived at work, Jacob, who turned white with fear with a bewildered expression on his face, came up to me and whispered,
Daniel, I stayed at the aquarium at midnight yesterday and I saw something crazy.
"What happened? You suddenly disappeared during work hours yesterday, so I thought you had to leave work for something urgent. But you were here?"
Yeah, I haven't been able to sleep since the day I saw the mermaid. I took sleeping pills, but I couldn't stay awake until the next day. So I hid behind a warehouse box and closed my eyes for a moment. But when I woke up, it was well past midnight after everyone had left work. I've been sleeping without even realizing it.
Jacob then started to continue his unbelievable story. He said he was getting ready to leave work belatedly and was surprised by the sound of people screaming outside. So he ran out of the warehouse to where the sound came from and found that the aquarium night team staff had caught visitors and locked them up in a cage and were feeding them to the mermaid. "I can't believe it's a man-eating mermaid. You've got to be kidding me."
It's true. I saw it with my own eyes. The mermaid suddenly changed like a piranha and ate up people. Actually, I was hesitant to report it because I was afraid I would get fired, but I don't think that's right. I should report it to the police.
Eventually, Jacob reported it to the police, and the police turned up at the aquarium to search the circumstances of the murder, but in the end, they couldn't find any evidence. So the cause was settled as Jacob was regarded to have filed a false report, and he was fired right on the spot. And after a while, I received a call from Jacob, late at dawn. "Jacob?"
Daniel, they're right outside my window. If I die, I beg you to find out who the culprit is.
"What are you talking about? Jacob! Jacob!" Jacob hung up even before I could answer, and when I called him again, he didn't answer. I thought Jacob had called from a nightmare due to the stress of being fired from work, so I made no big deal of it. However, the next day, I heard that Jacob had died at home for unknown reasons. It was clear that Jacob had been murdered by someone. I was shocked and suffered from guilt for days for not having reported it to the police, even after getting Jacob's call yesterday. Who were the people Jacob was talking about? Was it true, as Jacob said, that the aquarium was holding a free night opening to feed humans to the man-eating mermaid every night? I began to think that what Jacob was saying might be true. The next day, when I went to work with a heavy heart, people were gathered in front of the mermaid's tank that used to be empty. Finally, the mermaid had been displayed in the aquarium. I squeezed through the crowd and stood in front of the tank and finally got a good look at the mermaid in clear water. Surprisingly, the mermaid in the tank looked completely different from the mermaid I first saw. The black tail and fins had turned turquoise, sparkling with rainbow colors, and the upper body, which had resembled a mummy with its backbone exposed, had turned into the body of a beautiful woman with white skin as it had gained flesh. The mermaid rose to the surface and was looking down at people, and it had the face of a beauty with a pale white skin and blank look. "It's beautiful," people exclaimed, looking up at the mermaid, and the mermaid stood motionless in the water, looking down at people, just wagging its tail. Watching the beautiful mermaid, I couldn't believe Jacob's words that the mermaid eats people, but I decided to follow Jacob's last request to uncover the culprit. As the closing hour approached, after finishing work, I hid in the warehouse where Jacob did, lied down between the boxes, and waited for the night to come. At 9 o'clock at night, I heard the bustle of people again. Those who won the free night opening have come in. Likewise, after being nosy for a long time, it became quieter and quieter at midnight, as if people were leaving, and after a while, I suddenly heard someone scream. "Ah!" Startled, I jumped up and went outside, crept towards the mermaid's tank, hid behind the wall, and peeped towards where the sound was coming from. Surprisingly, the night team staff had caught 3 tourists and were forcing them into a square cage. "Why the heck are you doing this? Please let me out of here!" Among them, a foreign man, who appeared to be Hispanic, shouted, and at that moment, Dominic, the CEO of Aquaworld, walked over and asked the staff, "Are these people safe for sure?"
Yes, among the foreign workers, there are people with no family. We have carefully selected people who will not be found even if they disappear. All other visitors have left the aquarium, so don't worry.
Dominic, who was listening to the staff, nodded with a satisfied expression and gestured, and a ladder truck came in and began to move the cage with people inside onto the tank, and the terrified people screamed and grasped and shook the cage. Eventually, the iron cage reached the top of the tank, and when the staff pushed the iron cage into the tank, the iron cage sank to the bottom of the tank in a flash. People struggled to open the cage, but when the staff pulled the rope tied to the entrance of the cage, the door opened, and people got out of the cage and began to swim towards the surface. The mermaid that was looking down from the people coming up to the surface trembled its tail and zapped the man, violently bit his neck, and in an instant, the blue tank began to turn red with blood. The other 2 people were reaching out their hands on the surface, asking for help to get out of the tank, but the night shift workers came with long harpoons and stabbed them in the eyes, and while they were struggling, bleeding from their eyes, the mermaid devoured all 3 in a flash. As I was watching this scene, hiding, I was shocked, and quickly got out, shaking all over. Aquaworld may have bribed the police, as Jacob was regarded to have filed a false report, and considering that he died without a trace, I would also die like Jacob if I reported to the police. When I went to work the next morning, the mermaid's tank, which had been stained with red blood last night, had returned to a blue one, embroidered with beautiful corals, and the mermaid, which had eaten people like piranhas, was standing in the water with a beautiful woman's face looking down at people. Watching it gave me goosebumps. While looking at the mermaid, I suddenly realized that the mermaid's tail, which was over 2 meters long, had become much shorter. It was as short as the length of a human leg. The mermaid's appearance and tail length were also gradually changing, like human. On the aquarium, there was a notice attached. "Every night at 9, free night openings are held for foreign workers living alone with no family, homeless people, and low-income people. Aqua World of Dreams and Hopes will become your family. Tonight as well, after midnight, someone will be sacrificed by a man-eating mermaid." I went to work as usual, then went back to the warehouse and lied down behind a box, waiting for midnight. I covered my ears in agony due to the sound of people screaming outside. Waiting until 3 a.m. when it became silent, I carefully approached the mermaid's tank, and as if nothing had happened, the mermaid was swimming serenely in the tank that had been cleaned. I started to climb up the ladder to the top of the tank, and the mermaid was smiling at me from the water, and its smile was so frightening. Soon after, I climbed to the top of the tank and took out a great amount of potassium cyanide from my bag and poured it into the tank. After a while, the mermaid grabbed its neck and began to have a seizure, slamming its body against the glass wall. The glass wall gradually cracked due to the mermaid's tremendous power, and the tank broke and water poured down, and I plummeted to the floor, falling down from the ladder. Ugh! I lay moaning on the broken glass of the tank when I saw something whirling past me, and I looked up, and I saw the mermaid crawling on the floor quickly, with human legs that had grown out of both sides of its tail. Like the process of a tadpole becoming a frog, the mermaid had been gradually evolving into a human, as it ate human. The mermaid seemed to be in pain and got away, crawling in a grotesque manner. I barely got up and grabbed the harpoon beside me and followed the mermaid. The mermaid has to be killed so that there will be no more victims.
Put down the harpoon. Don't kill it.
At that moment, a man walked out from behind the wall, saying, "The man snatched the harpoon from my hand and threw it away." "Who are you?" I asked, surprised, and the man answered,
I was one of the sailors who caught the mermaid off the coast of Argentina. I heard that there was a free night opening at Aqua World, and I knew that it was a killing party to obtain food for the mermaid. When I came in at night, by receiving the foreign worker benefit, it was just as I expected.
"But why shouldn't the mermaid be killed?"
You have to take them alive to make money. I was against selling them from the first place, but one of the sailors secretly sold them to Aqua World.
The sailor chased after the mermaid and threw a net. The mermaid that was caught in the net shook its tail violently and revealed its sharp teeth. The sailor said, looking at the legs that have grown on the mermaid's tail,
How much human flesh have they fed to make it grow legs?
The sailor took a sashimi knife out of his inner pocket and cut off both legs attached to the mermaid's tail, and the mermaid let out a horrible shriek like a whale.
It doesn't have to eat human flesh, but it's just that it couldn't stop eating it because it tastes good. Meat has been precious to mermaids living in the sea since ancient times, but as people come to the shore when lured by mermaids, human was the easiest to meat for them to obtain. Since mermaids eat only what they want, they were only fed with human flesh. Mermaids were spoiled.
He dragged the net with the mermaid entangled and got out of the aquarium, and soon the sailors got out of the shabby freezer truck standing outside the aquarium and put the mermaid in the car, saying,
Thank you for your help.
They disappeared, and the mermaid's whereabouts were unknown since then. The next day, upon hearing the news that the mermaid had disappeared, Aqua World was thrown into chaos. And a few months later, another aquarium advertised that it was starting a free night opening event.
A man recently moved into our neighborhood. His name was Tony. One day, he invited the neighbors for dinner, and I ended up attending the gathering. So, a group of about 3 neighbors gathered at his house for a meal. We were having a pleasant dinner when suddenly he spoke up.
Everyone, I have a dream. Will you help me achieve my dream?
One of the neighbors, Jerry, responded.
Of course. What is it? I'll help you no matter what.
Then Tony abruptly stood up and went to the kitchen. After a while, he came back wearing white gloves and said,
I need to fill a record of 30 people, and it seems like that record will be achieved today.
We couldn't quite understand what he was talking about, so we chuckled and asked,
What record?
But then, one by one, the neighbors who were eating started to stagger and collapse. It was only then that I realized that he had drugged the food. He said,
This will be my final murder in life. Finally, I will achieve my dream, and from now on I will completely quit and live a quiet life.
Then he began to choke Jerry's neck with his hands. Jerry struggled and fell, causing the table to overturn and the room to become a mess. We did our best to stop him. Fortunately, I hadn't eaten much, so my mind was still clear. I shouted at Tony to stop, but he just laughed and said,
Once you've set a goal, you must never change it. That's the only way to achieve it.
He continued choking Jerry's neck. At that moment, Randy, who was next to him, tried to stop Tony, and I immediately called the police. However, Jerry already appeared to be dead. Tony then turned to strangle Randy. I punched Tony in the face with all my strength, but my body didn't have much power behind it. I watched Randy dying and felt my consciousness fading away. Just as I thought I was about to die, I heard the sound of police sirens, and Tony quickly started to flee. I held on to his ankle with all my strength and didn't let go. While he cursed and stomped on me, I screamed in pain, praying for this moment to end quickly. Soon the police arrived and arrested him. However, both Jerry and Randy were already lifeless. According to the police investigation, Tony was confirmed to have committed 7 murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he told the police that he had killed 22 more people, but he refused to reveal where the bodies were. So, it was unclear whether his words were true or false. However, somehow I have a feeling that his words might be true, because he killed people so easily, without any remorse or hesitation. His expressions and gestures were so relaxed and comfortable, and above all else, I can't forget the words he uttered when the police arrived at the front door.
Damn it. Only 29 so far.
There was a beautiful girl in our school. However, there was a rumor about her. It was that all men she dates would die. However, she was not arrested by the police as there was no evidence that she killed the men. There were all kinds of horrendous rumors about her. Therefore, in spite of her beautiful looks, all people avoided her. Then one day, she asked me out on a date. I asked her why she asked me out, and she replied, "There's a place I really want to go with you." Eventually, I ended up dating her, and I fell for her. I noticed myself rationalizing. I was persuading myself that nothing would happen even if I date her, and it's all just nonsense. That's how we developed our relationship, and we always spent happy days together. Then one day she asked me, "Don't you want to go to heaven?" I asked her what she is suddenly talking about. She replied, "I want to go to heaven with you. If I only get your permission, I can go there even now." Her eyes weren't joking. I was so flustered that I asked why, but she kept saying, "I prayed to God every day and heard him say that he has prepared a home in heaven for me. Let's go to heaven together. The two of us can live happily there." She handed me a drink. I could guess what that was. I got up and ran away. Then she cried out, "We are citizens of heaven." I blocked her number, and I never contacted her again. But a few weeks later, I got a call from the police. It was that she had been arrested for murdering a man. The man died after drinking a drink she gave him, and when he was dead, he was dressed in white. When the police arrived at the scene, she continued to pray next to the body, then said with a very happy expression, "God told me my boyfriend just arrived in heaven." The police arrested her on the spot for murder, and she yelled at the police, "Officer, he's not dead. He's in heaven. God told me that he has prepared a home for him in heaven. If you go there, you'll get to see him. It's true."
I'm a very light-weighted person, but I didn't expect that it would lead me into such a big trap. One day, while looking for a part-time job, I saw a notice from a medical student who was looking for a skinny male model to study the skeletal structure of the human body. I thought it was perfect and immediately made a phone call. I went to his house, and a tall man, over 6'2" and weighing over 250 pounds, greeted me. He was very friendly. Soon, he began to closely observe the bones in my body. After a while, he took out a syringe. I was very surprised and asked him what he was doing, and he quietly said,
"I'll kill you without pain, so please stay still."
I screamed and kicked him before running away. I ran frantically and entered a room, locking the door behind me. In that room, there were numerous mannequins shaped like skeletons. At first, I thought they were just models, but when I approached them, I could be certain. Those were not models, but actual human bones. Unknowingly, I let out a scream. Then, from outside the room, I heard laughter and a voice saying,
It's impressive, huh? You'll become one of those skeleton models too.
He started shaking the doorknob like crazy. I quickly put on the clothes in the room, trying to avoid getting pricked by the syringe. I had left my phone in the living room, so I couldn't call the police. Eventually, I had to leave that room and escape from the house. I opened the door, and he tried to inject me with the syringe, but I dodged him and punched him as hard as I could. However, he was a man more than twice my size, and I desperately punched him in the face with all my might. He screamed in pain. I used every ounce of strength I had and beat him relentlessly. He couldn't resist properly and took the hits. Then, I ran out of there and escaped. I immediately reported it to the police, and he was soon captured by the police. They investigated the DNA of the bones in his house and confirmed that they belonged to the missing people. He was sent to prison. While entering the prison, he begged not to take away the skeletons. It sent chills down my spine. But later, when I looked back on the incident, I realized one thing. He was twice my size, so he could have easily subdued me or beaten me down with his strength. However, he never had any intention of hitting me and didn't try to overpower me physically. He only wanted to inject me with a syringe and didn't attempt anything else. I pondered over why that was the case, and one thought came to my mind. If he had hit me, my bones could have been damaged. So he didn't hit me on purpose. He wanted to take my bones intact. I work as a detective in a special investigations unit. It's been over 8 years since this incident happened, but it remains the most memorable story of a criminal I've ever encountered. His name was Chase, and he was apprehended for brutally assaulting people. Due to the numerous accounts of his physical violence, he had been in and out of prison multiple times. So when I asked him why he enjoyed hurting people, his response was truly disturbing. Officer, have you ever hit someone? Well, for me, hitting people is the most enjoyable thing. No matter who they are, they all start off with an arrogant attitude towards me. But as I keep hitting them, they eventually kneel before me. No one is an exception. It's just a matter of how long they can endure. Eventually, they all end up bowing down to me. Even an officer like you. If we were to meet on the street, you'd kneel before me. But it's so amusing to me to make anyone kneel before me. It's more entertaining than any movie or game. He reminisced about those moments with a disturbingly joyful expression. As he stared at me, his gaze felt as if he was looking right through me, and it made me extremely uncomfortable. In a moment of courage, I grabbed him by the collar, and suddenly his eyes transformed, exuding a chilling intensity. He glared at me as if he wanted to kill me and whispered, "You're going to die for this." I felt a wave of intense fear, and I instinctively averted my gaze from his eyes. In any case, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. But after those 4 years passed, he came looking for me. Somehow he knew my home address and stood at the entrance of my house. He approached me with a bright smile and exclaimed, "Officer, kneel before me." I was shocked and anger surged within me, but at the same time, knowing what kind of psychopath he was, a sense of terror overwhelmed me. I had a gut feeling that emotional confrontation would only lead to more trouble, so I tried to remain as calm as possible. "You want to go back to prison again?" I asked. He laughed and replied, "It's all right. That place was quite livable, you know. If I can just experience the thrill of making you kneel before me, I'd go back anytime." He assumed a posture as if he was about to strike me with his fist. I felt my legs weaken instantly. Fortunately, at that moment, our neighbor James happened to pass by and greeted me. I asked him for help, and Chase froze for a moment before shouting one last thing at me and leaving. "I'll come back next time, and then I'll definitely make you kneel before me." I was engulfed in fear. From that point on, I carried a gun with me at all times, and a few days later, when Chase appeared near my house, I aimed the gun at him. Startled, he asked me why I was doing this and retreated once again. Since then, I constantly scanned my surroundings, fearing that he might appear. Occasionally, I could catch glimpses of him watching me from a distance, but he never approached me again. I haven't heard any news about him since then, but he might be out there assaulting others. However, Chase, I hope I never have to see you again.